Look, I mean, I think that we need to do what we should always do, and that is to do our work. I'll give you a little background. So, after Trump came into office in 2017, on his very first day in office, he went to the CIA. He was talking to the CIA agents in front of a memorial to fallen CIA agents. And he said then, as you know, I'm at war with the media. Seeming to suggest that the intelligence agents of this country should be enlisted in his own war with the media. I was asked a couple of weeks after that what my reaction was to what Trump had said. And I said, we're not at war with the administration, we're at work. We're doing a job. And I'd like to talk about that because that's what I think we should learn from what's happened and what I hope we'll be doing if it turns out that Donald Trump does get reelected, because he will inevitably not only attack the media, I think he will actually try to suppress the media, actively try to suppress the media. And that is that, what is our work? Our work is spelled out essentially in the First Amendment to the Constitution, obviously, which provides for free press and free expression of all sorts. But when James Madison was talking about the First Amendment, he talked about freely examining public characters and measures. So the public characters, the politicians, government officials, people with authority and power, measures of the policies that they implement that affect the daily lives of people. But the word that really deserves a lot of attention is the idea of examining. And that's our work, okay? And it means that we're not stenographers. We need to know who did what, why, who's it affecting, who influenced those decisions, all those kinds of, and what was their intent. Those are the kinds of things that journalists do, is to sort of look more deeply. And that is our work. And when it comes to the President of the United States, our obligation, the President of the United States is inarguably the most powerful person in the world. And so we as the press have an inarguable responsibility to examine what he's doing and to tell the public what he's doing. I see our job as journalists is to give the public the information it needs and deserves to know so that they can govern themselves. They decide what to do. And so I think we should stick to our work and do it in the most rigorous, honest, honorable, responsible, fair, objective, and independent way we can. That's what we ought to do. Not think of ourselves as warriors against Trump, even if he sees himself as a warrior against us. And that is very powerful. If you do your work really well, if the evidence is really solid, if it's fairly presented, if it's unassailable, then it can have enormous power. And I've seen that in so many instances. The Catholic Church is one of them. I've seen that in many other instances with other media organizations as well, whether it was the Coming Out Papers or Watergate or innumerable cases at the local level. And so that's what I hope we'll do. And that's something that I'm going around talking about a lot, is how we should carry ourselves as reporters, because I think if we carry ourselves professionally, it's a very powerful thing.
Marty, you talk about journalism. Journalism is a really big tent, right? I mean, if we ask anyone here tonight, tell me what you think of when I say journalism, or God forbid your favorite term, media, then they'll have lots of different answers, right? It might be the local paper, it might be CNN, it might be Fox News, it might be, it might be lots of things. When you read your book, you oversaw not just the Post, but you read Miami Herald, Boston Globe, innumerable stories and departments, right? Sports, arts, features, incredible journalism during that time. But in your book, and when you talk, when we talk personally, you always come back to talking about investigative work, investigative stories, right? Why? Why is it that those are the pieces that you always come back to and remember?
Sure. Well, it goes back to that examining word, is that we need to dig deeper. And so I think that there's a lot of work that we do that no one would ever do if we weren't there. And then we have a responsibility to do that. Yes, there's an important role for a legislature. There's an important role for the courts. There's an important role for the executive function at the national level and at the state level and at the local level as well. But somebody independently needs to be looking at all of these organizations and all of the powerful. Somebody needs to look at the powerful individuals and powerful institutions in our society, including other media organizations, right? So we should be held accountable just as we hold others accountable. And so who would do that work? When I was in Boston, I got, every time our Spotlight team, which was our investigative team, would do a great investigation, I would get a lot of emails from people saying, this is why we need a free press in this country. This is why I have a subscription to the Boston Globe. And if you weren't, and then they would say, if you weren't there, nobody would have done this. And I really like those. And so, in fact, that's why I set up a separate unit to do investigations more quickly, a more rapid response type of team. Because Spotlight worked on the longer ones. And I said, you know, I like these emails so much. They're so much better than the other emails that I get, that I would like to get them more often. So maybe we should do the investigations more often because the public forgets, they forget the great work that gets done. They will, my theory over my entire career, and I think it's pretty well based, is that people remember our mistakes. They tell you there are mistakes. They will never forget our mistakes. They will remind you of our mistakes forever. But they forget our accomplishments very quickly. So it's really important that we remind people that we are there as an independent check on institutions with a lot of power and authority, and of individuals who have power and authority. Because if we didn't do it, nobody else would. And so I see that as just part of our responsibility.
Okay, circling back to your work at the Boston Globe, you were there for around 10 to 11 years right before you moved on to the Washington Post. Do you think for inspiring journalists, would it be possible for them to put themselves in local media outlets like Boston, and your work in Florida as well, for occupational growth? Like jumping from the Boston Globe to the Washington Post is obviously like, it's a pretty intense leap, but for people that want to get into the industry, do you say you should be at this local media post for 10 years before you move on? Is that like valuable to their experience?
Yeah, well, I was at the Globe for 11 and a half years, pretty good. You know, I mean, in the context of Boston, they considered me to be an outsider. I was always called an outsider. I mean, when I first got to Boston, people would say, how is Boston different from the other places, all the other places you've worked? Because I also worked at the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times. And I said, oh, well, in the other places, they always call me a newcomer. But in Boston, they call me an outsider. I think, you know, in terms of somebody who's new to the profession, first of all, start wherever you can and get your experience. And always remember that your first job is not your last job, all right? There are a lot of people getting into careers now, not just journalism, who are looking for like the perfect job, okay? It's in the city that they want to be in, or it's exactly the place they want to be in. They want those exact day-to-day work to be absolutely perfect and completely fulfilling. And maybe you'll get lucky and get that, but you know, not every job is the perfect job. So when I started at the Miami Herald in 1976, and I worked there for 3 years. I did 3 different jobs in those 3 years there. They moved me from a little town called Stewart with 12,000 people to Boca Raton to Miami. And after 3 years, I felt that I had I kind of got what I needed out of the Miami Herald, and they weren't expanding the area that I was responsible for covering, which was business coverage. They had only 4 people on the business staff, and they just added a 5th. And when I told the editor that I was leaving, he wondered why, and I said, well, there's not a commitment to business reporting. He said, in his best Southern accent, he said, what do you mean? We just expanded it by, 20% faster than any other department. I said, that's because you have so few people in the department. The percentage was so high. So, and then I went to the LA Times, and I stayed there for 17 years. People have forgotten that I worked there, but I worked there longer than any other place. And I worked in New York for them, I worked at LA for them, I became an editor there, I became a business editor and an editor of special reports and things like that, and editor of their biggest regional edition with 165 people. But I always wanted to move to the next job and look at, well, how is that going to enrich my career? How is that going to expand my experience? What am I going to learn? Not just what am I going to contribute, but what will I get out of it as well? And will there be opportunities for me? And I looked at my jobs at different newspapers that way too. I mean, I had been the editor of the Miami Herald for really only a year and a half. And I expected to be there for a lot longer than that, but this opportunity came to go to Boston. Boston was a bigger city, it's a top 10 media market. It had a much larger staff. It had about over 500 people, whereas the Miami Herald had 350 at the time. That sounds large in the context of all these news organizations these days. And it was owned by the New York Times Company, which I felt would give us the independence we needed and would invest for a longer term. And whereas Knight Ridder, which was the other company that owned the Miami Herald, was very short-term oriented in terms of how we were performing. So I saw that as an opportunity. But I stayed there for 11 and a half years. And then when I went to the Post, it was just by happenstance. I got a call out of the blue saying that they were looking for a new editor. A friend of mine got wind of it and told me about it. And he said, they're looking for a new editor and they're going to call you. And I said, but they have an editor. And he said, yeah, but he's not going to be there long. So, so then, you know, it was a great opportunity. It is the Washington Post, an iconic newspaper. It was troubled like all news organizations at the time. But I thought that was an interesting opportunity and a chance to see if I could help.
Again, thinking about the national media landscape and the Post, you know, where you were at, have been through troubles like the rest of the industry, but, you know, comparatively, relatively, have far more resources than local outlets. Most of our, you know, most people's experience with news over the past 10 or 20 years has been pretty negative, right? It's been about cutbacks, layoffs, bankruptcies, closed papers, smaller papers, no printing, etc. And certainly that quality, right, the level of reporting, fewer reporters and less quality reporting at the local level. From your time kind of in both places, right, at the national and at the local level, the state of local journalism and especially local investigative journalism, why is that so alarming to you? And how concerned are you about that?
Right, well, I am concerned about it. I mean, I think that, look, I mean, if you don't have local investigative reporting, nobody's paying attention to your city council or town council or whatever it is in the jurisdiction. You know, nobody's paying attention to county government or to state government in many instances, to the police department, to the environmental agency, to the schools, all of that. Nobody's paying attention, and forget about, I mean, investigative reporting, but just think about the kinds of stories that involve subjects that actually bind us together as a community, whether it's sports or the arts or many other things that bring us together as a community and show that we actually have common interests, not that news is not just stuff that divides us. And so there would be nobody to cover that. And that's what's happened in so many places around the country, is that there is nobody to cover that. And so I think it's really important that, you know, when government officials know that there's nobody watching, a lot of mischief occurs, and it's an opportunity. And so we shouldn't give them that opportunity. We should hold them accountable. We should represent the interests of the general public to make sure that their government officials are doing things honorably and honestly, and, you know, not corruptly and not abusing power and treating people equitably, all of that. And who would be doing that work if it weren't for the press? There's a reason that the press was created by the founders of this country. And they felt that there needed to be an independent entity that kept watch on all of them. And so, you know, it's great that I think you just recited a litany of depressing circumstances in our business. And, but I would say, look, there are other outfits that have grown up in that messy environment that we're in now. You lead one, which is doing a great job of growing and doing investigative work. And there are others that are out there that are doing this kind of work as well. And some are doing investigative work, some are just doing general community work. And we need all of it. So I'm encouraged by the resourcefulness of people in our business, by the new entrants in our business that are starting up new sites. Some of it's in the nonprofit sector, but some of it's in the commercial sector. And I feel that our business, that the profession is being totally radically reinvented. I mean, it's going to have to be, because look, the way that people consume news is being reinvented. And you know, everybody's getting news off a mobile phone. They almost always do it on the internet. You know, yes, we have printed products, but most people aren't looking at that. And now with generative AI, people are going to Google and getting an AI-generated answer to their question, which, you know, there are a lot of problems associated with that as well. So, so in any event, the whole field is being reinvented, and we need to reinvent ourselves and get out ahead of the curve.
As we reinvent, going back to like inspiring journalists and younger journalists who want to get into the field, you reference talking to government officials, and in your book you go into like working with Jeff Bezos himself. It can be really intimidating for the younger journalists or for the inspiring journalists to go out there. My question to you would be, what advice would you give those journalists navigating conversations with people in supposed either like financial or social power?
Well, if you're easily intimidated, journalism may not be the field for you. So get over it, you know? I mean, in fact, this gives you a great excuse to go ask people questions that you would not have been able to ask them before. And, I was asked, because of the book, there was an Australian national radio did an interview with me, and they talked about, well, many of the young journalists have to go out, and they talk to people who they're in kind of a hostile environment. They're talking to people who may not appreciate them, and they're worried about that. What's your message to them? And I said, they might want to consider getting out of journalism. And if they don't get out of journalism, they should consider growing a spine. Because that's what we have to do. And I think that's, but we should think hard about, well, what are the questions that need to be asked? We should make sure that there's I say this all the time, is that we shouldn't assume that we have the answers to the question.
Voice call from
That's
1-202-993-5273.
I'm writing that down, I'm gonna call it. We shouldn't assume that we have the answers to questions before we go out, and I think that's the problem that we see too often in journalism. People think they know the answers before they've even embarked on the reporting, in which case you have to ask yourself, what does reporting mean if they already know the answers, other than it being an exercise in confirmation bias, their own confirmation bias. So I think it's really important that we focus very hard on what are the questions that really need to be answered, and then go out with an open mind, with determination, with rigor, and try to get the answers to those questions. And not be intimidated by the people that we're talking to, not be intimidated by the complexity of the subject, not be intimidated by any of it, but with the determination that our job is to learn and find out what's happening on behalf of the general public. And so I think if you think a little bit about, I'm not just there for myself, I'm there for the public to try to get answers, and do your homework before you go out for these interviews, so that you're not intimidated. And once you've done it often enough, you're not that intimidated anymore. Look, one of the things I did when I was in college is I got an MBA in addition to getting a journalism degree. And so, when I was covering business, and a lot of journalists are intimidated in talking to people in the business world because they're dealing with complicated subjects and all of that. And I thought to myself, I went to school with these people. They're not any better than I am. I got better brains than they did. So, I'm not intimidated by that, and I can do my own financial analysis at the time. I don't think I can do it now, but I did then. And I can see what's happening. I can look at the numbers, and I can go into some really good questions. And so, basically, do your own work, and before you go out and talk to people.
Sticking with not being intimidated, right? There's a great anecdote you share in the book that I wanted to recount, but also noting, and I think it was in the prologue, where you talk about how journalism as an industry needs to fight more, needs to kind of get its fight back, not be afraid to use the courts, not be afraid to, really kind of stand up for itself and explain what we're trying to do and kind of get out there more. Can you tell the story about how you and your team at the Post weren't intimidated when you were sort of attempted to be set up by someone as part of that Roy Moore story?
Sure, it's a long story. So we did an investigation. We stumbled kind of on the subject. We did an investigation of the Republican candidate for the Senate in Alabama, named Roy Moore, who had been a state judge. He had actually been Chief Justice at one point. We heard, as we were working on one of our reporters was working on a feature story really about why people supported him, and she had grown up in a Baptist family, and she was seen as support in a very strongly Baptist community. But she heard from people who were joking about it that he had a particular affection for very young women. Women we would call just yet women. And so she started exploring it a bit more, and then we had another told us about it, we had another reporter, and it turned out that, yes, there was, he did, and at least that was the allegation, and that one of those women was underage when he had sexual contact with her. And so, so we reported that story, and it was explosive. It was completely explosive, and then we came under attack by right-wing media, extreme right-wing media, and people were endeavoring to discredit this story. In fact, even before we published the story, the Roy Moore campaign leaked it to Breitbart so they could publish the story before we even did, and then made it look like it was all political on our part, which it was not. So anyway, we got a call after that from a woman who said, a young woman who said that she had had relations with Roy Moore. She had been impregnated by him, that she got an abortion at his behest, and that she wanted to meet with us and tell us the story. So, so we started doing some research. We also realized that she didn't give us her real name, which is kind of unusual. And people don't want their name used, but they don't often give us a fake name. We did some research. We found, like, somewhere on a GoFundMe page, of all places, that she said she wanted to be part of the conservative media movement to fight the mainstream press. We thought, what's going on here? But we then decided to meet with her, and we met with her. We were pretty sure that this was an effort to entrap us. So we brought along a video team, which started videoing that encounter surreptitiously. We were able to do that in that particular state in Virginia, because the law allowed it there. And so then we confronted her. We got her real ID. We got all of that, and then we started trying to follow her back. Like, who is she? Where did she come from? We tried to tail her. She ducked into a Target. She crossed the highway. She ducked into a Target. Went into the Target. She walked out immediately, got her. Anyway, we lost her. But then with our research, we figured out where she lived. And we went up there, and after, I think it was Thanksgiving holiday, we just followed her as she was going into work. We didn't know where she was going to go. And she ended up at the Project Veritas headquarters, which was not publicly announced, but we knew that it was the Project Veritas headquarters. And so we knew she worked for Project Veritas, which has as its goal to try to trick and trap journalists and mainstream journalists and embarrass them. And so we confronted James O'Keefe, who was the head of that, as he came out, and he was surprised for the first time, perhaps, didn't have much to say. and then he went back in and he brought down his own camera crew out and tried to totally distort what actually happened. Anyway, we wrote a story about our investigation we did many stories about our investigation of Roy Moore, and we did a really explosive story about what Project Veritas had tried to do. We've generated huge support from the public. I mean, my favorite one was the person who sent us an email saying, please keep taking your vitamins. And we won a Pulitzer Prize for that work. And I was very tempted at the end of that to send James O'Keefe a note saying thank you for helping us win a Pulitzer Prize, but I decided not to do that. So that was, that actually was the most fun chapter for me to write in the book. Some of the other stuff wasn't so fun to write about, but that one was a lot of fun to write about.
Wow, like, you've been through so many, interesting stories and, situations, and I know it can kind of get grating. Well, I do have a question for, the advice of aspiring journalists. How do you keep your mind clear and concise when it comes to dealing with these complicated situations? I mean, even jumping from the Boston Globe and getting that tip of becoming a part of the Washington Post, going through the trials and tribulations of interviewing, and deep diving into the institution, and all the things dealing with Trump. How do you keep your mental health in check, and how do you make sure your mind is clear to, oh, this is exactly what I'm going to do next to deal with the story?
Well, people might dispute whether I kept my mental health in check, but I tried. I didn't really do anything other than work. So, I mean, look, the current environment is that it's not just 24/7 in our business, but 24/7 in every minute. People expect to get information instantaneously, and they expect it to be right. And so that means that, and particularly during the Trump era, where, you know, at some early hour in the morning or late at night or whatever it was, he would say something on Twitter that was at times significant, and was a signal of what his policy was going to be. We had to react to that. And then there were inevitable controversies about coverage or whatever it might be, and people attacking us for one thing or another, and we had to respond to that. So I was working all the time. I mean, I got up at 5:15 in the morning. I went to sleep usually about 11:45 or midnight, and I'd get up and look at our competitors, and then things, of course, could happen in the middle of the night as well. And you know, I mean, at some point, look, right after I retired in February 2021, somebody said, "How do we deal with all the pressures in the job that you have?" And I said, "I retired." At some point, it's enough already. But during that time, it was just focused. Look, we have work to do. It's really serious. It's really important. The consequences of screwing up are pretty devastating. And so you look through stories and say, well, what is it we need to know? It gets back to the previous point. Like, what are the questions that we need to be answered? There's so many times you're reading a story and say, there's something here that needs to be answered. Even on at the Boston Globe, that whole Catholic Church investigation came about because I arrived in Boston as an outsider. I was reading a column by Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist Eileen McNamara that ran the day before I started at the Boston Globe. And she talked about this case of a priest by the name of John Dagan, who was accused of abusing as many as 80 kids. And the lawyer for the victims said that the cardinal himself, Cardinal Law, was aware of this abuse and yet continually reassigned the priest from parish to parish without telling anybody, without telling the parish priest, without telling the parishioners, and without telling the public, and thus enabling this priest to abuse again and again and again. And the Archdiocese said that's absolutely not true, totally false. And at the end of the column, she said, the truth may never be known, because the internal church documents that would reveal the truth are being kept secret. They're under a confidentiality order, and so the truth may never be known. Well, when somebody says the truth may never be known, that should be like chum to journalists. That's like, you should be saying, well, wait a minute, that's not, we didn't find out the truth. And so the next morning, I went into the Globe. It was my first day, my first news meeting, and everybody talked about, the department heads and assistant department heads talked about what they were working on for the day, and nobody mentioned this case. And I said, well, I just read this piece. Can't we get beyond? One side says one thing, and the other side says something else. Can we get to the truth of the matter? And somebody piped up, said, well, the documents are under seal. And I said, I know, I read that. So, but have we thought about going to court to get them? And there was like dead silence. And I said, well, why don't we talk about that? We talked about it. We ended up talking to our outside lawyers, and I'd never done it before. And then I told the columnist, Eileen McNamara, I said, well, guess what, we might go to court. And she said, wow, that's great. We've never done a proper journalistic investigation. And I said, is that true? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay. So we pulled together the spotlight team, and we launched on the two paths, the journalistic investigation and then going to court. And we succeeded on both paths, and then we published in early January of 2002. And that was kind of like, well, there's a question here that needs to be answered, right? And so, can we answer it? Should we try? Sometimes he won't succeed, but sometimes he will. Even in that case, our lawyer got back to us a few weeks later with his assessment of the case, the law, the judge, all that stuff. And I asked him, I said, so what are the chances that we will prevail? And like a good lawyer, he said 50-50. So, and I said, well, those are good odds for journalists. So we should go ahead. And so we did. And it's a matter of like, what are the questions that we need to think about the questions. What is it that's left unanswered here that deserves to be answered? And that's how I approach the job.
part of why we're all here, part of why Newspalooza is happening in a few weeks is to raise more awareness about why the public needs to kind of get more involved in the news and kind of reclaim the public stake in the news, right? Which was journalism is really intended to be a service and a resource of the public, but you know, for such a long time, journalism as an industry was a very lucrative and profitable commercial business. And really the journalism never really made the money, right? It was the advertising and everything else around the journalism that was monetized. And that whole model broke, right? But the journalism, as you've talked about, the role of the journalism never broke, right? But now as an industry, and especially folks like us, we're in the nonprofit side, have to do a lot of work and have a lot of conversation about why it is now that the public needs to get invested, why it is now that the news should be thought of as a philanthropic endeavor, similar to other philanthropic endeavors that have been in that space for a long time, like the orchestra, the arts, etc. What would you say to someone here tonight, or just in general, who said, ask that question of, well, why should I support the news now? Why is this, of all the things I need to support or whatever, why are the stakes high here? Why should this be my priority?
Well, the simple answer to that is you should support it, because if you don't support it, you're not going to have it. And that's the reality, is that there won't be news coverage. Look, it's one quality coverage, meaning that actual reporters, professional, gone out, done their work, verified the information, which is really important. We're in the process of verification, not just assertion, but actual verification of information. Then somebody needs to pay for that, and pay for it either through subscription or, in many cases, a membership or a donation or something like that. And because otherwise it's not going to happen. And it is a public good. I mean, how many organizations, many institutions and local communities are now discovering that there is no press coverage. And so people aren't coming to their arts events. People aren't going to the events that they don't know about it. And also that there, as we talked about before, that politicians seem to be able to get away with things that they wouldn't have been able to get away with before. And so it takes time to sort of sit through a city council meeting and actually know what's going on in a city council meeting. It takes time to be in the courthouse and actually monitor what's happening in the courthouse and understand the complexities of what's happening there. It takes time to understand the education issues in our communities and to talk to all the appropriate people. So that is a real value. I mean, certainly the founders of the country considered that to be a value, that we need to do that kind of work. If it isn't supported, it simply won't happen. I mean, one of the concerns, I think there's been, for too long, people in this country have taken a free and independent press for granted. They didn't realize what a gift they have, what a gift the founders have given us. I mean, all you need to do is look at other countries where they don't have a free and independent press and look at the, there's no free expression for anyone, because if you're an authoritarian, the first thing you do is go after a free and independent press, try to crush it in various ways, certainly exploit its financial weaknesses of today, for example. And then that just opens the way for an authoritarian or any government official to do whatever he or she would like to do. And so people have taken it for granted for so long. And people also think in this internet era, well, as information is everywhere and everywhere it should be free. But the reality is that there's a high degree of difference between the quality of the information that's out there and in the kinds of subjects they could cover. Because sure, there are people who will cover certain kinds of things or provide information on that. There will also be people out there who will provide a lot of misinformation and disinformation, so deliberately false information, because they have an absolute agenda. Their agenda is for personal, professional, or commercial political gain. And so we need an independent press. And without it, I think we lose a lot in our communities. We lose a lot as a democracy. And I'm not sure that a democracy can survive. Actually, I'm certain that a democracy cannot survive without a free and independent press. There never has been a democracy without a free and independent press, and there never will be one. We need a democracy, obviously, to succeed as a press, but democracy needs a free and independent press. There's never, in the history of the world, there's never been a democracy without a free and independent press, and there won't be one. And the reason that so many authoritarians go after the press is because they know that it is a firewall, and they need to make sure that firewall doesn't exist if they want to become the authoritarians they want the authoritarianism that is their objective.
Touching on your topic of the internet and its usage of press, and how journalism has changed over generations and the importance of why the public needs to be interested, do you believe social media has had a positive or negative effect on news coverage? And I guess the specifics of that.
Sure. Well, if you read my book, I think you'll come to the conclusion I feel it had a negative effect on journalism. Look, I mean, I think social media has done some good. I think it has elevated voices that previously weren't heard by the mainstream press, by anybody. It gave people an opportunity to share what they know. It gave experts an opportunity to communicate with the general public when they weren't able to communicate necessarily. They didn't have to go through the funnel or the intermediary of a traditional news organization, and that's all been good. But I have been very disturbed by the behavior of a lot of journalists on social media. I think that it's become a forum for expressions of opinion, impulsive behavior, expressions of rage, anger, sarcasm, snark, failed humor. I could go on. And it's appalling. And it's destructive to the reputation of these news organizations. I mean, we could spend weeks on I was so grateful that when we did the Catholic Church investigation that there was no social media. There was no Facebook, there was no Twitter, there was no nothing. So basically we took great care of the stories we did, what the headline was, how the stories were written, the view of the story, the photos that were used, the proportional representation on paper and online and all of that stuff. And we let the journalism speak for itself. And I think back now and think, okay, well, if we had done that in the era of the internet and in social media, what could have happened? One person on the staff could have gotten on Twitter and talked about the horrible life experience they had as a kid in Catholic school, which is totally irrelevant to the subject. Another person could have talked about their views of celibacy, Another could have talked about, whether the church really has moral authority, particularly when it comes to issues like abortion rights. All of that is totally irrelevant to what we were doing. What we were doing is looking at, the policy and practice of covering up sexual abuse of minors, and which is a crime. Okay, that's the subject. That's it. Nothing else has nothing to do with. It's not an attack on the Catholic faith. It's a demonstration that the institution of the Catholic Church was betraying its own parishioners and its own principles. So there wasn't an attack on the Catholic Church. It had nothing to do with abortion rights. It has nothing to do with the issue of celibacy. It has nothing to do with any of that. That's the story. But now, you can take all the great care you want with the story, and one person on the staff feels he or she has the right to express an opinion or make a statement of some sort on social media, it's like lighting a match to a gas tank, and all of a sudden you're reacting to the response of people, and they see that as representative of the institution, and that's what happens. And so you're having to respond to that crisis. That becomes the image of the place, as opposed to all the careful work that we did. And I think it's really important that people who work in institutions think a little bit about the institution they're working for, and recognize that they should work to strengthen that institution, not to undermine that institution. I mean, pretty much all of the people who came to work for the Washington Post, everybody who came to work for the Washington Post, came there because of its reputation. And they knew that by being associated with the Washington Post, their own individual reputation would be enhanced. And they should think, like, well, what established that reputation in the first place? And that was an adherence to certain standards and certain modes and certain means of behavior. And then to sort of go and behave in a way that violates the standards, actually hurts the standards in many instances of the institution, and in a way that actually undermines that very reputation that drew them to the Washington Post. I think that's a disaster. It is a disaster. And we've seen it too often. And so, you know, we had one of our meetings after a big explosion at the Post. You know, somebody told me it was, everybody was talking about I, me, my right, my feelings, my this. And I was waiting for somebody to say, us, we, our. Us, all of us together as an institution, we recognize that we need to think about the institution. And let's not undermine the institution. Let's not think only about ourselves, but let's think about what this means for the Washington Post or any other institution.
And moving forward, we can't get rid of social media, and obviously we have to use it as an asset. And not only are we thinking about the institution itself, what other ways can we use social media in a positive way, despite ourselves as individual journalists, and to help this institution?
Well, I mean, I think you can use it in constructive ways, and most of the people, for example, on our staff, those who were doing exactly that, they didn't violate our standards. They used it as a way to distribute their work. They used it as a way to make some sort of personal connection and allow the public to recognize that they're human beings behind this work, and not a faceless enterprise. They may have given greater insight into greater analysis or insight into how they develop the story. A whole bunch of things that can be done very effectively that way. And then, so those are the kinds of things that we should think about is, well, how do we use it as a tool that actually advances the interests of the institution? And in advancing the interests of the institution, we advance the interests of everybody who actually works here. And those are some of the constructive ways. There are many other ways that it can be used, but those are some that come to mind.
Chris is going to ask the last question so that we have time for audience questions.
So Marty, earlier you sounded a note of optimism, hope, which I think is rightly placed. During your time, one of the things that caught a lot of attention while you were at the Post was the new slogan that was debuted. 4 very hopeful words: democracy dies in darkness. You talk about in the book how that was sort of a bang your head against the wall process with Jeff Bezos, who we haven't talked about much here, and probably would prefer it that way. But can you tell people a little bit about the process of how you got to that slogan, and then also talk about what those 4 words actually meant and caused after you did put them on masthead?
Yeah, we put them everywhere. When we came out with it, it was right after Trump took office, and a lot of the Trump and his supporters thought that it was a reaction to him, but it wasn't a reaction to him. We embarked on that process like 2 years earlier. Bezos, after he acquired the Post, a couple of years actually after he acquired the Post, he thought that we should have some sort of, he didn't like to call it a slogan, he didn't like to call it a motto, he called it like a mission statement for us. Because, you know, the New York Times for all those years had all the news that's fit to print. It's a little out of date, by the way, with the internet age, but they don't really use it anymore. But he felt we should have something, and he said he wanted something that captures sort of the distinct role of the Washington Post, as opposed to all the other media outlets that are out there. They've captured our sense of being the nation's capital. How can we differentiate ourselves? And it would be aspirational. And he said he wanted it to be something that he said, don't be afraid of the word democracy. He dropped that in there. And he said, he said we're probably not going to be able to rely on metrics. The judges will have to be a judgment call of art. And he wanted it to be on said I wanted it to fit on a t-shirt. Like one line on a t-shirt. Like we're like, no wonder he's the richest man in the world, you know? Like, it's genius. $9.99. Why is it sitting on the t-shirt? But he said I want it to be, I don't want it to convey a product that people should buy. I want it to convey an idea that people want to belong to. That's it. And want to associate with. Well, that was interesting. And I really like that because I think that news organizations, a newspaper or whatever, it's different from other, it's not a product like any other, it's a relationship that we have with the public. People feel it very personally in a way that, not so much about the washing machine they bought, right? Or even the cell phone that they're holding or whatever, but it's a relationship. And And so we went on that, we embarked on that. It took, oh God, it was a nightmare. I mean, it was, you know, so we had over 1,000 ideas, most of them really bad. We finally came down to, it was like, I thought our marketing people were going to get fired. We gave it to two groups of consultants outside. Came up that Bezos didn't like their results, and he said he hates consultants, so he said, well, typical, they never have any original ideas. And we're going to come up with this ourselves. And so we boiled it down to maybe half a dozen of them, and we met at a hotel, some luxury hotel in Washington, and said, we're going to decide it, we're going to decide it now, this will be done. We're going to do it in a half hour before he has to go on his plane. Anyway, it took a little more than a half an hour, and we came up with one. It wasn't out of the 6, we came up with something right there. And we thought, okay, well, we're done. And then he sent us a note later that evening after we got home with his now his wife, Mackenzie, who's a novelist. And he sent a note, he said, well, bad news, you know, my wife is the wordsmith in this family. And she has declared this to be Franken's slogan. So that was dumb. So, and then ultimately he just said, well, why don't we use Democracy Dies in Darkness, which is a phrase that had been circulated out there, particularly by Bob Woodward. He had used it a lot, and it was an adaptation of what a judge had said. It doesn't go back to Watergate, as many people assume, but what a judge had said, that democracy dies behind closed doors, and he had said it in that particular case. So we, you know, everybody said, you know, of course, yes, of course. And, you know, many of us were worried, including myself, because I think if you were to ask most marketing experts, they would not advise using death and darkness in your mind. So I was a little nervous about it, but we had tried things with light, like, you know, all of that using light, and it either sounded too self-aggrandizing, or it sounded like we were members of a cult. And it's like, this is not working very well. And so we couldn't come up with one with light in there. And so, you know, so we came out with it. It created a lot of commentary, I mean, and a lot of ridicule. Some people continue to ridicule it. Columnists one of the columnists said that it was the new goth vibe of the Washington Post. And Bezos loved all the ridicule. He was just like, he said, the worst thing that can happen is you come out with something like this, and there's no reaction. Nobody cares.
That's right.
And the fact that people are talking about it is a really good sign for us. And it was incredibly well received by the general public. They loved it. People remember it. People know it. I did a talk in Chautauqua in upstate New York, and I was asked by the moderator asked the audience there, how many of you know the motto of the Washington Post? All these hands went up. So what is it? And in unison, they all said, democracy dies in darkness. It was just incredible. So, and it was a powerful signal of what our purpose was, which was to shine a light in dark corners, to hold powerful institutions accountable, to recognize that the public needs to know what's happening in its government and in its society. That is the role of the press, and that would be the mission of the Washington Post. And so it had a really powerful effect, and there remains. But when Trump left the White House. Not so voluntarily, but when he left the White House, I got a lot of notes from readers saying, you can drop that now. No, that's not it. That wasn't the idea. It's our perpetual. We're keeping this perpetual. And because regardless of who's in the White House, this is our obligation to do this. And so it's been hugely successful and amazingly so. But at the end of the process, after he decided on it, all I could think of is like the serenity prayer. I was like, that's great. It's over. There's nothing I can change. I need to accept this, and I'm fine. Whatever. He's the boss. He's the owner, and we'll go with it. But the reception was amazing. I didn't answer that in the book, I mean, because nobody was talking about generative AI when the book came out. That's only something that people have been talking about. Well, maybe they were talking about it, but it wasn't part of my time at the Washington Post. And I mean, I mentioned it. I guess I do mention it late in the epilogue. Now that I think about it, I do mention it in the epilogue, and I say that, you know, there are opportunities with it, but there are a huge number of risks. It can be a very powerful tool, I think, for us in terms of journalists managing all the things that we need to do today, which are far greater than anything that we've had to do in the past. Coming up with a headline that's good for a search engine, coming up with a headline that's good on social media, coming up with a selection of photos that we need to use and finding those photos. There are a whole range of writing an alert, you know, updating a story with new fact that we can, you know, just ask it to automatically update, a whole range of things that it can do. But it comes with a lot of risks, and the risks are that there will be a lot of information, a lot of video that will be completely fabricated. There will be a lot of audio that's fabricated. There will be a lot of still images that are fabricated, and they will be circulated instantaneously all over the world. And we are incredibly ill-equipped to catch up with that. We don't really have the infrastructure in the news business or in any other business, in academia or anywhere else, to respond to that. And government doesn't have the capacity to respond to that and reach as many people as quickly and as effectively as that does. And not only the fabricated stuff will be out there, but now people will, when there's something true that's verified, people will say that was Gen AI, that I never said that. Somebody fabricated that. And so the risk is the public won't be able to discern what's true and what's false, and believe that you can never decide, you can never determine what's true or false. And so you just believe the person who is kind of like your tribal leader, your ideological leader, and that's the way it is. And that is a really dangerous place to be for society when people not only can't decide what's true and false, but have decided that you can't determine what's true or false. That's a dangerous place to be. Yeah, sorry if it was too blunt, but I do tend to share my views, and particularly when I'm asked for them. So, and I think it's sometimes helpful to just say things flat out. I mean, with the staff, I think it's always important to just talk about the mission and why we're doing things and what I think you have to recognize that most people who are working in journalism are not working for it for the money. They're working because they feel they serve a higher purpose. And so that doesn't mean that we should be crusaders, or we should be pursuing a cause. But it means that our cause should be the truth and the ally of the truth, not the ally of any party or ideology or anything like that. How do we get at the facts? How do we put them in proper context? How do we make sure that we did our work appropriately? How do we make sure that we gave the public the information it needs and deserves to know? And so I'll just give you an example. So after Trump was elected, this is in the book. After Trump was elected, look, we had written a lot about Trump. We'd done deep dives into his life and his career. We did a whole book called Trump Revealed. If you were to read that today, you would see that it was actually quite revealing about Trump. We had dozens of reporters on that, and we felt that it was important that people know who the guy is and what his business history was and what his personal history was. And then he got elected. And so a lot of people on the staff were like, well, does anybody read anything we do? Does anybody see what we did? And does it even matter? And I had a meeting with the national staff afterwards, because I was asked to sort of address their sense of anybody paying any attention to what we're doing. And I said, look, this is a democracy that we live in. The public has the right to decide who they want to be president of the United States. And by the way, it's the same democracy that gives us the right to do our work, to do it freely, to do it independently. So let's just keep doing that. Trump's been elected. We have to keep doing the kind of work that we've done up till this point. And that's what we should be focusing on, just focusing on our work. And so that's what I've tried to do is, let's not get distracted by all these other things. Let's not get distracted by attacks. Let's not get distracted by people who want to suppress their cause. Let's not be distracted. Let's just understand, what it is, our work is, and let's just do it every single day. Well, I was there a long time, so I can tell you what my experience was and what I know to be the experience ever since I left. And that is that he never interfered in any of our coverage. Not once did he interfere in our coverage. I'll just give you another anecdote, which is also in the book. After the election, he was coming to our office mostly to focus on a business meeting. And I asked if he could spend some time with the people who had covered the election, just to thank them for the hard work that they had done, because they were all suffering from a little PTSD. And he did. We had a 45-minute lunch, just some sandwiches and all that. And somebody said, well, look, I mean, he's been attacking you throughout the campaign, which he was, attacking him and Amazon. He's happy to be president of the United States with all the power that that brings. How are you feeling about that? And he said, don't worry about me, I can take care of myself, just do your job. That's it. The people there practically levitated out of that meeting. They told everybody in the newsroom what had happened. And he stuck to that. He said at the very beginning when he acquired the Post that he wasn't going to intervene in the news coverage, and he didn't. He never suggested a story, never suppressed the story, never critiqued the story, never did any of that, including the stories about Amazon and about his private life, which became the subject of a lot of coverage at one point when he had an affair. And he never, our product reviewer never had a single positive thing to say about an Amazon product. Not one. One of them, he said that, he just said, well, it's just more evidence of how that Amazon is creepy. That's what he said. And it was published. I never heard a word from Jeff Bezos about it, and I never asked him, because I wasn't going to invite his guy. And I had never heard it. And I can tell you this, newsrooms are the leakiest places on earth, absolutely the leakiest places on earth. And if there had been any interference, you would have heard about it by now. Some journalists would have said they interfered with my story about Jeff Bezos, or he was trying to exercise influence over this. None of that has happened. There isn't a single reporter, single editor, a single journalist of any type at the Washington Post who has ever said that he intervened in any way to influence our coverage. So if that were the case, if it turns out that's the direction that the country were to go, I'm sure that he would just let us cover it like anything else. And his view is I know for a fact that his view is, look, I pay the taxes that and I have this in the book where it's a chapter called The Owner. And his view is, I pay the taxes that I'm required to under law. And you want to change the law? Change the law. But I pay the taxes I'm required to under law. So that's his view. He might choose to manage an asset some way differently, but he pays what he pays right now. So that's his view. But he doesn't think that he needs to intervene in the coverage. Yeah, I'm sure that's true. I'm sure you're right about that. I don't know that I have great advice except for you need to network with other journalists who are out there. A lot of that can be done in investigative reporters and editors, which I'm sure you participated in that program. They're a very good organization. They do a lot of great training. Make sure that you maintain your relationships with those folks and that you can consult with them and that you have mentors. If you don't have a mentor within your own organization, find a mentor outside of the organization and maybe establish a relationship with former editors and get to know them because look, people, they like to be called for advice. I like people to remember that they're still alive and that they have something to contribute. And so, go meet with them, have lunch with them, have dinner with them, whatever. Say you want to meet with them and talk about, maybe some project you're working on a confidential basis and see if they have some counsel for you. I don't think enough journalists take advantage of the network possibilities. I'm always surprised. I'm not always surprised. There are a lot of journalists who don't want to go into the office these days, all right? If I were a young journalist today, I'd go into the office every day. Why? Because you don't want to have lunch with these experienced journalists? I do. I'd be going to breakfast with them. I'd be going to lunch with them. I'd be going to dinner with them, having drinks with them. They have something to teach me. I might be listening and sit next to them and listen to how they can actually conduct an interview and how they extract information from people, and maybe I can learn something from that. I think that the idea that you're sitting at home and that you're just doing your own thing is the best way to practice journalism. I don't agree with that. And so, network and find mentors somewhere else if you can't find them within your own organization. Well, we need people such as yourself, and such as all the other people here, and people throughout the community, and people throughout the country to recognize that if we start to lose free speech, we lose democracy, we lose the ability not everybody's gonna do that, but some people will. And my view is that, you know, we're not gonna persuade everybody. I said this earlier today to folks, but 25 to 35% of this country believes in all sorts of crazy stuff and conspiracy theories at any one moment. People who believe that the Holocaust was invented or fabricated or exaggerated. People who believe that we never landed a man on the moon. People who believe that, going back to the fluoridation of the water supply, that it was a communist plot, or that 9/11 was carried out was an inside job, as one of Trump's friends says these days. People say this stuff, and people believe it. And that's always like 20, if you look at any one of these conspiracy theories, it's 25 to 35% of the American public at any one moment. But look, the country's direction is determined by 5% going this way or that way. Can we work to get another 5% to accept evidence, to accept things as they really are? Can we be more persuasive? I think we can, in a variety of ways. And one is to show people the evidence that we have and lay it out for people, just as a lawyer would do in court. I'm not talking about the role of a lawyer as an advocate, but lay out the evidence, persuade the jury of what you've got. And we need to do a lot more of that. And we need to do it without suggesting or even being like part of the cause. Do it because our cause is to the truth. That we're going to lay out the truth. And so I think we can do a better job of that. And I certainly think that we can get another 5%. And if we get another 5% to accept evidence, maybe then we can start working on another 5%. After that, that may be all we can hope for. But that changes the course of the country. Look, it goes far beyond politics. It's about how do you make human progress? How do you get people to accept science? How do you get people to accept, evidence on any subject? It's not whether we lean more right or left or anything like that, but whether we make decisions based on evidence, and that should be just as true of people who lean left politically as it is of people who lean right politically. So let's make decisions based on evidence. People can have their different policy preferences, but whatever they are, let's do. Look, it was Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the senator from New York, who said you're entitled to your own opinions, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Let's figure out how to get to that point where people recognize we all have our different opinions. That's the nature of democracy, but that we should have work from a common set of facts. Today, the problem is that we don't work from a common set of facts, and we can't even agree on what a fact is, and we can't even agree on how to establish that something is a fact, because all of the things that we've relied upon in the past, historically, like education and expertise and experience and evidence, and most of all evidence, they've all been dismissed and denied and denigrated and all of that. We need to get back to a point where we agree on how to establish that something is a fact, and then we have a common set of facts.
How? The question was how?
Oh, how?
How?
Oh, how do we? I just talked about that. I think that we need to lay out evidence. We need to show people, like on every story. I thought you said wow, and I was so flattered by that. I said how, and I'm not so flattered. But no, I think that we need to. Well, first of all, there are a lot of things we need to do as journalists. One is that we need to cover all people in our society fairly and see themselves reflected in our coverage, that their lives are being accurately and fairly reflected. We reflect their struggles, their aspirations, their expectations, all of that. Setting aside politics, that they see that we understand who they are, so that they are more likely to believe us, because we understand. They see themselves and their lives reflected. And we don't do a very good job of that, quite honestly. So we need to think about that and how we do that. And then we need to be much more transparent about how we go about our work. We need to show people every piece of evidence. I talked about radically footnoting our stories with links. You got a court document you're referring to? Give them the court document. Annotate the portion. You can annotate the portion of the document that's relevant to that, and then show them the whole document so that you didn't take it out of context. With a video, you want to show a clip? Fine, show a clip. But don't just show the clip, show the whole video so that people can see that you are not taking it out of context. Same thing with an audio. If you have a data set, where did that data come from? Show them, take them to the data set, because that's entirely doable, and do it throughout a story and in every story. That's not how news is presented today, but I think it's how Wikipedia is presented, by the way. Everything is like footnoted out the wazoo. And Wikipedia has a high level of trust in Wikipedia, which people thought nobody would trust. But in fact, a lot of people trust. And sometimes not always they should, but a lot of it's pretty damn good. And so, because it's highly footnoted. And so we should think about that. And basically the message to the public should be, check our work. Check, please, here, check our work. We've shown you what we did, what are we missing, what should we be looking at, did we misinterpret anything? And take a look at it, check our work, and that should be the message. So that's my answer to how. You're welcome to say wow now. Wow. Well, I would recommend as best you can to have a conversation with that editor about it and come not emotionally but dispassionately to argue your point of view as to why this is distorting the coverage, why it's not a fair representation of what's actually happening, or why it's keeping information from the public that they should know, that puts things in better context. And sit down with that editor and say, look, I mean, this is it. And maybe even write like a short memo that is dispassionate. And that's the important part, is that it's logical, dispassionate, not filled with emotion and all of that. And tries to make a persuasive case. And do that over some period of time. If you find that over a period of time, your work is consistently being distorted and twisted in a certain way, you probably ought to think about where else you might want to work, because that's probably not a place that you're going to feel comfortable over a long time, and it's not a place you should feel comfortable. So